tall buildings.
Well, I think like my dad, like many people who grew out of the Depression, were very saving people.
Yes.
Who never,
Oh, no.
getting a microphone.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, my dad worked for the Port Authority, and they built the Holland Tunnel under the river. And then he went to work for Turner as the war began, and worked for him all his life. And he was the chief engineer on Madison Square Garden, Lincoln Center, the UN, and a lot of other places.
Wow.
Chase Manhattan Bank. And his homey, Jersey City way, he used to say, "I wish the whole damn place would fall down."
Why is that?
Oh, he thought New York City was crazy. Which, of course, is a defensible position. You don't live in New York City, so you don't know.
I used to. I went to New York University.
Uh-huh.
Got my graduate degree there in journalism.
Well, you know, that's in the crazy neighborhood.
So
I went to Columbia
you did.
for 5 years.
Well, you're a prolific writer.
Well, I don't know how prolific, but
I'm going to stay back here so I can see
yes.
what's going on with the camera since I'm a one-man band.
Band, yes. I just might put my legs back a little bit. I hope that wouldn't throw your camera off.
No.
Just, okay, that's okay. I have a serious problem with edema because I have a serious heart condition.
Do you have congestive heart?
No, I have it's called irregular heartbeat, which is really atrial fibrillation. I also have cancer, which is at present under control and in remission, and heart trouble, and also I'm a medical miracle.
It sounds like it.
Shouldn't be alive, but they figured something. They wanted me to do something before I left.
So, Father Benedict, what happened that day?
Oh, in Florida?
Yeah, in
Well,
Orlando.
Well, I had left here on Friday and gone to California to give a day on Saturday and came back on an early flight Sunday morning. So I probably was tired. And I was trying to cross this busy highway, which goes through a populated area, right where you rent cars. And Father Lynch and Dave Burns were with me. And they were getting the car, and I went to get them some burritos for supper. They hadn't had any supper. And I, trying to cross the highway, and there was a bus stop, and I walked in front of the bus, but a car was diagonally behind the bus. He didn't see me, I didn't see him. And that night, I had no blood pressure, no heartbeat, no pulse. And the doctors finally gave up at the trauma center. They gave up, they took off the gloves, but they had drafted Father Lynch to suction me. And he cried out to them, go back, don't give up. So they did out of deference to him. And you know, they got a heartbeat. And then a few days later, because I was still unconscious, they tried to, my body blew up like a porpoise. And I had toxins. And they opened me up full of toxins. Got my sister's permission. And they couldn't find the source. So they told the friars to make arrangements for my funeral, which they started to do.
You mean when your body was blowing up?
Blowing up because it just filled
From
with...
the edema?
No, from toxins.
Ooh, in the liver?
Well, they don't know where. And Father Lynch prayed all night over me, all night invoking the holy name of Jesus. And the next morning, the toxins drained. And the doctors said to him, whatever you're doing, don't stop. Don't stop. I'm going to have to ask you a favor.
Sure.
I forgot to take my medication. Just one pill,
Okay.
which is right behind you.
This one?
Number 1 is on the top of it. It's called,
Okay.
you got number 1?
Yep. Lopressor?
Lopressor. Just give me one in my hand, and you can give me a little glass of water.
Anything else?
No, it's all I need. Just a glass, there's a glass right there on the cup, right there on the water. I usually have brothers with me, and I don't have a brother today. They're all on a pilgrimage.
So it sounds like there was a lot of people praying for you.
There were, and immense numbers of people. I got 50,000 emails, and that's a result of being on EWTN. And the 2 days after my accident, the Friars website got 700,000 hits. We have a little website for our community. Is it coming through clear enough?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, I looked on your website and I pulled up
Oh, that stuff is
a
all
number
right.
of
Yeah.
things. It's
So nicely done, isn't it?
very nice.
The brothers do a good job of that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, do you feel that, I mean, this might be silly coming from a person like me, but do you feel like God intended for you to stay for
Yes.
a longer period?
Oh, sure. Jesus says, not a sparrow falls to earth that your heavenly Father does not know it. The hairs of your head are numbered. So, I don't say that God caused the accident. Of course not. God doesn't do bad, he does good. And he causes that evil does not become the worst. I would have been perfectly satisfied to go. I'm an old man, and I've done
You're not that old.
71. But I've done a lot of things. But he sent me back. And I also had a heart attack right after the thing. I mean, I shouldn't be here. The doctors call it a miracle, but it isn't a theological miracle. Because the theological miracle is a complete, instantaneous cure. But it's a gigantic medical improbability.
Talking about miracles, Mother Teresa is now in the process, of course, for the cause of canonization, of becoming a saint. She's been beatified. Are you aware of any second miracle?
No.
No.
No, I haven't heard. The sisters probably would have told me if there was one around here, but they haven't told me.
Because the sisters in Atlanta told me about a boy in San Diego who had a miraculous healing
Oh, well.
recently.
That may very well be. I don't see the sisters so often right now.
Right.
I'm a little out of touch.
I wonder why.
Can't imagine.
So, Father Benedict, can you, like as you said to me in the beginning, can you tell me a little bit about your life and how you grew up in Jersey? What led you to becoming a priest? And
Well, I knew when I was 7 that I was supposed to be a priest in Jersey City, and I never changed my mind. I had a wonderful holy nun that taught me, who loved the poor, and she went out every day and cared for an old woman. And I had seen one movie, with no television, of course, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, on a first run. And if you remember that movie, there's a wicked witch in that movie who's a very wicked witch. And I followed the sister, and she went into a tenement with, she used to bring supper on a tray or in a box to the lady. And I went up the back stairs, and I looked in the window, and right in front of me was the wicked witch, this old woman with the hair hanging there. I was so scared, I jumped off the milk box, down the stairs, up into the church, and I was kneeling there praying in front of the statue of the Blessed Mother. And I said to myself, how come the witch doesn't hurt Sister Teresa? And something said to me, because she's kind to her. So I said to myself, well, if people were kinder to witches, maybe they wouldn't be so bad. And something said, be a priest. So I never have thought of being anything else. And I wasn't thrilled about it, because the priest lived in a kind of ugly house, and he had a crabby old lady that was the housekeeper, who I thought was his wife. I didn't know beads, you know. I was a little kid. And but I never thought of being anything else. And when I was 13, I read the great poem by Longfellow, The Legend Beautiful, about the monk who's taking care of was supposed to take care of the poor, and in a vision of Christ appears to him in his room. And he's kneeling there, speaking to Christ. When suddenly from its belfry calling comes the convent bell appalling, summoning him to feed the poor. For this was the appointed hour, when alike in shine and shower, in winter's cold and summer's heat, to the convent portals came all the beggars of the street, all the halt and blind and lame, to get their daily dole of food, dealt them by the brotherhood, and their almoner was he, who upon his bended knee was lost in divinest self-surrender, as he saw the vision and the splendor. Should he go or should he stay? And so the poem goes on, and finally something says to him, do thy duty, that is best. Leave unto the Lord the rest. And he leaves, and he looks back, and he beholds the convent bright with a supernatural light, like a luminous cloud extending over wall and floor and ceiling. At the gate the poor were waiting, looking through the iron gating, with that terror in the eye of those who amid their wants and woes know the sound of doors that close and of steps that pass them by. Grown familiar with disfavor, grown familiar with the savor of the bread by which men die. But today seemed the convent gate to rise, like the gate of paradise, like a sacrament divine, seemed to them the bread and wine. And he takes care of the poor, and he rushes back, and he gets to the door, and the vision is still there. And Longfellow says, and he paused with awestruck feeling at the threshold of his door, for the vision still was standing as he left it there before. Through the long hours intervening, it had waited his return, and he felt his bosom burn, comprehending all the meaning, when the blessed vision said, hadst thou stayed, I must have fled. It's a beautiful. So I decided I was called to be a monk of an order that took care of the poor. And so when I was 17, I joined the Capuchins, who did, not entirely. And I was a novice in the monastery with a venerable servant of God, Father Solanus Casey, who was about to be beatified. And he was a miracle worker, humblest, holy soul. If you asked me who was the holiest person I ever knew, I couldn't tell you between Father Solanus and Mother Teresa. I couldn't tell you. I joined the Capuchins, and I was one for 35 years. But 14 years, I had a wonderful job. I was chaplain of a psychiatric treatment center for disturbed and delinquent boys at Children's Village. I'll be saying Mass there tomorrow. And the friars still take care of it, although there are far fewer Catholics than there used to be. Used to be half Catholic because of the Puerto Ricans, but the Puerto Ricans have all moved up. So it's,
Can we hold just one second?
sure.
All I'm going to do is I just...
All right, you're on.
We're on?
We're on.
Now, does that light just feel a little bit smudge on your
No,
face? Are
no.
you sure?
Not at all.
Take it away a tiny bit. I love your poem by Longfellow.
The Legend Beautiful.
So you went to Columbia as well?
Well, when I was ordained, I started to study counseling at Iona College here, and I got a master's, and the brothers suggested that I go on, the Irish Christian brothers, and get a doctorate so I could teach in the seminary. And I've been teaching counseling in the seminary since 1965. So next year is 30 years. And you know, after I got the degree, and I had been at Children's Village 14 years and was supremely happy, Cardinal Cook asked me to take this old house here and make it into a retreat house for priests, which we did, and it's been here 30 years. I'm the only person in my community that doesn't live and work with the poor. My luck, you know. And I would love to live and work with the poor, and I've asked to, but it just isn't to be. So when I get to the judgment seat of God, and they don't look too pleased with me, I'm going to say, I tried. I gave it a shot, you know, give it a try. But
Well, that's part of the rules of your orders, to live and
yes,
work.
to live and work with the poor.
But you are. I mean, you're administering from here. It's not like...
Yes, well, I do work with the poor, but not full time. I love the South Bronx. I love Harlem. I relate to poor people marvelously easily, and I always did. I relate especially well to black people, but also to Hispanic people.
Why especially to black people?
Because when I was a little boy, I realized that there was something terribly wrong with the way that black people were treated. I knew that when I was a youngster. I don't know how I knew it. And there was a very poor black family lived not far from us, a large family, and I used to hang around. And the older people were suspicious. What's this little white boy doing hanging around, you know? Because segregation, polite segregation, but northern segregation, was still there. And I was very fortunate. I knew Martin Luther King, and I was much involved. Two movements I've been involved with in my life was the civil rights movement and the pro-life movement.
Now, people, I mean, regard you as more conservative. Would you consider yourself?
No,
No.
I'm a traditional Catholic.
Traditional.
Politically, right now, we have been driven out of the Democratic Party. You know, we didn't leave the party left us. And I won't vote for anyone who is not pro-life or is pro-abortion. Anyone, under no circumstance. And I think that's awful when you grew up and belonged to a party that was concerned, at least officially, about the welfare of the poor and civil rights. But the party has been co-opted into a lot of causes which I think are destructive to the country and to the fabric of society.
So, what was your role in the civil rights movement?
Oh, you know, I was very active in going to meetings and speaking for the NAACP and doing things like that. And I was a friend of the family of one of the civil rights workers who was killed in Mississippi, Michael Schwerner. And Mr. Schwerner and I, Nate Schwerner and I, went down when they were having the big march in Selma, we went down to Harlem to march. I couldn't get permission to go to Selma, so I went to Harlem.
The crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, is that?
Yeah, well, but they had a big thing in Harlem that day. And we're walking down 125th Street, and Nate says to me, "Do you think there'll be any nuns here today?" I said, "Well, you know, Nate, this isn't exactly what nuns get into." And we turned the corner, and there were 500 nuns in a phalanx. And if you're a Catholic schoolboy and you went to the nuns to school, 500 nuns in the old habit is enough to stop your heart from missing a beat. And oh, it was a great day. I think probably the most beautiful thing I was ever involved in terms of society was the civil rights movement. I wish I could say that about the pro-life movement, but we haven't succeeded yet. I never went to jail for the civil rights movement, but I went to jail for the pro-life movement. And
Where?
Here in Westchester County, for saying the rosary in front of an abortion clinic. I went with one of our brothers and a bishop, Bishop Lynch.
Did Mother Teresa ever go to jail?
I don't know. Demonstrations were not Mother Teresa's style. We should talk about Mother Teresa.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
I want to learn a little bit more about you too. I mean, I you know, when I go.
The word is schlep.
Schlep.
S-C-H-L-E-P. That's the word, schlep. I'm schlepping through. And yeah, it's a nice word, schlep.
What do you mean you're schlepping through?
That's how I'm making it through life, you know. Schlepping.
Well, it seems like you're not schlepping. I mean, it seems like you're influencing a lot of people. And now that you're...
But it's by accident, you know. I'm over in Ireland and I get this phone call from this nun. "I made 8 phone calls to get hold of you." I said, "Well, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were trying to call me. I want you on my network." So this is Mother Angelica. And I've been on EWTN for 20 years, you know.
I didn't know that. Sorry, that's my cell phone. I'll let it go.
What's
My
that
cell
music?
phone.
What is the Puccini?
Da, da, da.
That's Verdi. It's Verdi, isn't it?
Yeah, so, sorry, let me just, that'll go. Stop it, phone.
It's Verdi. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it from?
Some opera. You
Yeah.
know, I got to have a choice of some beautiful music. So this little nun, why would she contact you?
Mother Angelica.
Yeah.
She saw me on television or something, I guess.
So she wanted you to appear on
EWTN. And I've been on for 20 years.
And what is your main focus on EWTN?
Teaching the Catholic faith and the Christian faith in a way that has a meaning to the people who listen. And I always try also to reach beyond that to non-Christian people. And I have a lot of non-Christian people, especially Jewish people, who watch me.
Why? Jewish people usually aren't that attracted to priests.
Oh, cut it out. Not in New York. Oh, no, we get along very well in New York. I grew up with the Jews. In Jersey City, you know. Oh, no, we get along very well. It may be someplace else, but not here. And there's been a coalition between the Catholic hierarchy and the Jewish leadership in New York for many, many decades. Oh, sure. When Cardinal O'Connor died, there was a mass for him the night before and at his funeral the next day. Between the two masses, 100 leaders of the Jewish community went to St. Patrick's Cathedral and recited the Kaddish and the Psalms for Cardinal O'Connor. And Rabbi, what's the name of the rabbi? He's the chief rabbi, he's the head of the board of rabbis. He gets up and he says at the end of the prayers, I'm not here as a Jew, I'm not here as a rabbi, I'm here as a sheep who lost my shepherd. I mean, so what else could you ask? Oh no, we get along well. Of course, Mother Angelica, they like her too. See, they like Jewish people like nuns, or the old nuns. I was getting on the plane one day, and this guy stands up and he says, "Hey, Father, I seen you on television." And I says, "Yeah." I says, "Would you mind me asking?" I says, "Aren't you Jewish?" Because he was real old-fashioned New York Jew. "Sure, I'm Jewish." I said, "What are you doing watching Catholic television?" He says, "You and the old lady have a Jewish sense of humor." Well, I told her that. I told it to her on television. She thought that was the greatest. You and the old lady. So, you know, we have a lot of fun.
What's the future of the Catholic faith in light of everything going on right now, the changes in the church?
Well,
I wasn't going to...
which changes? There's all sorts of changes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you know, since you're talking about EWTN and your message is appealing to people of all faiths.
Well, but mostly the Catholics. I'm talking to Catholics.
Mostly the Catholics.
And it's Orthodox Catholicism. I'm Orthodox, which means all teaching. Don't leave anything out and don't change basic teaching. What do I think? I think this silly period will be over. I think we're going through a kind of silly period like they went through in France before the Revolution, and they went through at the Renaissance. And it's a silly time. I'm afraid that the United States is at the end of the road. As Mother Teresa said so well, no nation can exist, can survive, that kills its own children. That's pretty clear. And I think the country is sliding into paganism. And I think what will happen is it will come through very stormy weather. But don't worry about the church. The church is having a bad time right now because of the scandals. And I've been working with people with troubles for years. Part of it is a media event. The other day, the principal of a high school in Long Island was indicted and dismissed for sexual activity with a student. It was on page 40. It was on page 40 of a paper that goes after the Catholic Church every day. And there's a book called The New Anti-Catholicism. It's laying out there by Philip. And he's not a Catholic, he's an ex-Catholic, but he sums it up very, very, very well. Philip Jenkins, the professor at Penn State. And so we're under the gun from the media, and other people are going to be under the gun soon. The rabbi's wife lives down the street. She said to me, "And when they get finished with you, what will they do with us?" You know, the Jews in New York don't read the New York Times because it's so anti-Israel. They consider it an anti-Jewish paper, the New York Times. So we'll see. We'll see. I warn our brothers and sisters, because we love our habit and we always wear it. Somebody may rip it off your back someday. Don't be surprised if you come to persecution. Today is the feast of a great Franciscan who died horribly under the Nazis, St. Maximilian Kolbe. This is the day of his death, the anniversary of his death. And but we got to talk about Mother Teresa.
Okay. No, it's. I mean, that's exactly my sense in this country. Is it's slipping into decay.
And the church is being punished for its own purification. You know.
And it's also being scapegoated.
Oh yes, scapegoated and punished. And I have very many friends who are bishops, because I've worked with priests these many years. When I write a book, I usually send out 100 copies to bishops who are friends of mine. And the newer bishops are very well aware that the church needs reform. The purpose of our community is to care for the poor, to preach the gospel, and to work for the reform of the church. That's explicitly our purpose. We're called the Friars of the Renewal, but it's only because the church does not permit you to use the word reform in your title. Renewal is a code word for reform. And if you met our young men and young women, you'd be startled by their obvious mental health and robust Catholicism and their sense of humor and their austerity and their love for the poor. We just had 8 brothers made final vows. Splendid men. Splendid. And they're going against the tide. They got to walk around New York City in this robe. And it doesn't bother them one little bit. You know, if you see somebody staring at you in New York when you're wearing a robe, I always say, you folks from out of town. You know, New Yorkers never stare at anybody, you know. That's not our style, you know. I mean, it isn't the thing to do, you know, stare at people. Because by staring at them, you admit that they look different. And nobody looks different to a New Yorker. They've seen it all.
Absolutely.
You folks from out of town. It always throws them off when I say that. You folks from out of town, where are you from? You know.
Well, I spent my early 20s here in New York. And,
In the 60s, 70s?
No, early 80s.
Oh my God.
Late 70s,
Yeah,
early
early.
80s.
It was screwball town then.
Yeah, and I felt like what I was doing was documenting the dark side of life.
Yeah, yeah.
So I really went through a whole few years of just documenting the real dark aspects of life.
Yes.
To become immersed in them. I immersed myself in documenting the very fabric of the decay, the beginning of the decay. You know.
The old monk said it very well. And after this, our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb. Mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Blessed Herman of Reichenau said that. And it's very pertinent. Mourning and weeping in New York City, which can be a fascinating place. I love the museums. Once in a rare while, somebody takes me to the opera. You know, somebody gave me some tickets to the Dialogue of the Carmelites. But it also is a stainless steel machine that grinds up human beings and spits out the pieces. One of the things that the friars are associated with substantially is the Good Counsel homes for homeless mothers with babies. We put we give them a lot of financial support. And I'm, in fact, the
Some water?
chairman. No, I need a cough drop. Hang on just a minute. I got cough drops. But we still better get to Mother Teresa. You're going to go home without an interview on Mother Teresa.
Where did you meet Mother Teresa?
Well, I was invited by one of her very good friends, Eileen Egan, who wrote a book about Mother Teresa. And Eileen invited me one night to her little apartment in Manhattan. And the place was jammed with 60 people. And there was this little nun. I had heard about her. She wasn't terribly well known. And I looked at her and I said to myself, she's so ugly, she's cute, you know. Her face looked like a baseball bat, you know. So I waited, my turn, and I finally got up to talk to her. And the room disappeared. These little eyes. And I was talking to her in an empty field. There was nothing around us, no distractions. We only spoke a little bit. And I was, when I got finished, I was almost dissociated psychologically. What in the world happened to me? And so I made my mind that I would get to know her. And when her sisters opened in the South Bronx on 145th Street, I was still at Children's Village. And I knew a lot of people in that neighborhood.
What year was this?
1968. So I started hanging around and doing things for the sisters. And she asked me to give them a retreat and all sorts of stuff. And, you know, she was a remarkable person and a devout person. I didn't know she was going to be a world-class saint, you know. And I knew the sisters. And when I went to work for the Archdiocese, Cardinal Cook made me the liaison between the Missionaries of Charity and the Archdiocese. I never failed so magnificently at anything in my life, because being the liaison between these two groups is like choreographing swan and hippopotami into a ballet, you know, and I failed completely. I always tell people I had 285 arguments with Mother Teresa, and I lost all of them, because I was supposed to get her to do what the Archdiocese wanted. Didn't work. I remember about 28 years ago, Cardinal Cook asked me to drive her around to look for an old convent where they could start the contemplative sisters. And she had told me she was going to start the contemplative. So we drove hither and yon, and we found the place. But he wanted her to take over the Old Carmelite Convent, which was not the Carib Hilton, I want to tell you. And it was in the middle of a very poor neighborhood. But it was a newer building and slightly impressive building. 60 rooms, concrete, solid concrete building. But it was a Carmelite convent. So I take her there, and she goes, "Acha." Good heavens in Hindi. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "It is so fancy, the poor people will be afraid to come here." I said, "Not the New York poor people, Mother Teresa. They go right to the White House." Well, she wasn't having any of it. So I took her down to see Cardinal Cook, who's also proposed for beatification. And I don't have to get that. He's also proposed for beatification. You know that, Cardinal Cook. So the Cardinal Cook could charm the birds out of the trees. Mother Teresa, you know. And he's kind of pushing her, but Your Eminence, she didn't want to take the place. And finally, she says, "Your Eminence, help me. I am just a poor, weak, old woman. Don't let me destroy the poverty of my order. Well,
Can you say that again? Because the phone.
hand me the phone.
Okay.
This is somebody.
That's too
This,
good to.
this is somebody who's desperate. Trinity. Hello. Who is this? Oh, Anthony, Father Benedict. How are you? Fighting my way through. Yes, thank you, Anthony. Thank you for your prayers, too. Oh, my goodness. Well, I appreciate that, Anthony. Yes, I've met him before. Yes. Sure. Absolutely. No. The thing is, I have to say Mass tomorrow morning at Children's Village. Now, if you want me to come by your place on my way back, I can do that. That would be probably around 11:30. At what time? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you tell him that this strange-looking figure, an ancient of days, with a long white beard, looking something like the ghost of Christmas past, will be coming, all right? Archbishop of Freetown. Tell him I've met him. Isn't he a cardinal? No, he's an archbishop. Okay. Uh-huh. I see. Will you tell him I'll be there? I think Father Glenn gave him some of my books already. Okay? God bless. Yeah, hold on to it in case it rings again. So,
Can
Cardinal.
you say that again about her telling him?
She said to Cardinal Cook, she says, Your Eminence, help me. I'm just a poor, weak old woman, and I don't want to lose the poverty of my order. I'd rather go home. So I thought to myself, well, there we are. That's finished. And he got the message too. I mean, so she went downstairs and I stayed behind. He said, well, Benedict, I could have twisted her arm. I said, you could, huh? She had you on the floor in a half Nelson, half Nelson's of wrestling. So downstairs I go, and we're in the car, and she says, well, how do you feel about the whole thing? I said, well, Mother, to be honest with you, I'm humiliated, but I'm not humbled, unfortunately. I wish I was humbled, but I'm usually just humiliated. And she said, well, cheer up. Humiliation can be the road to humility. So she she had a real sense of humor, It wasn't a rollicking sense of humor, but it was a great sense of humor. And I got to know her well. She invited me to go to Calcutta, which I did to give the sisters retreats. And
what year did you first go to Calcutta?
I only went once. I think it was in the 80s, someplace in the early 80s. And but whenever she would come to New York, I usually got to see her. And by this time, of course, not only everybody else, but I myself began to recognize that we had a saint on our hands. And
what was it? What quality of hers led you to believe that more than any other?
prayerfulness, absolutely, absolute charity. You know, she never drew the line. And of course, she always seemed to know what to do in a difficult situation, which is the gifts of the Holy Spirit. I remember one time she asked me to get something done, and I did, but I didn't do it precisely the way she wanted me to do it. In fact, I wouldn't have got it done if I did it that way. And she didn't make it too clear what she wanted. And she was a little bit annoyed, piously annoyed. And I've had saints, canonizable saints, annoyed at me, so it's a lot of fun, gobs of fun. And so I was driving her back from someplace, and she was slightly giving me the needle, however politely. And she was always an absolutely polite Victorian lady, you know. I mean, she had Victorian manners, or Habsburg manners, I should say, because where she came from was under the Habsburgs, you see, was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And
I've never heard her described that way. That's fascinating.
what way?
Having these Habsburg manners.
Oh, yeah, she's a perfect lady. And when I say Habsburg, the Habsburgs defined what propriety was in their world, as Queen Victoria defined what was right in their world, English manners. And she had those perfect manners. But there I am getting the polite needle. And when you're getting the needle from Mother Teresa, it feels like you're being harpooned by Captain Ahab, you know. I mean, it's not a lot of fun, you know. So we got around to 145th Street. And I said, Mother, I have to tell you something. I'm going to ask Cardinal Cook to please appoint another priest to be the liaison. I can't handle this. I'm not angry. I'm not annoyed. I'm just outclassed. I can't handle this one. And she said, come in. It's 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night. And she says, sit down. And when Mother Teresa said, sit down, let me tell you, he sat down, you see. And she said, why do you think God chose you to be a priest? I said, Mother, it's 11:30. Why do you think God chose you to be a priest? I said, I don't know. Maybe he had a sense of humor. God chose you to be a priest because he is very humble. He chooses the weakest, the poorest, the most inadequate instruments. Well, you know, there was very few things she could have said to me at that moment that would have helped me that much. It was the right thing to say. So I said to her, well, she said, I pray that when I go, my place is taken by the most unattractive and ungifted of the sisters. And then everybody will know that this was not my work, but it was God's work. Now that's a very revealing statement, you know. It was not my work, but God's work. I mean, she, despite the fact that she won the Nobel Prize and all these other things, she had no great positive attitude toward herself. As a psychologist, you know, I was, fortunately, I'm not a psychologist who particularly believes in psychology, so I was able to deal with this. But if you talk about people having a lot of self-esteem, forget Mother Teresa. She had no self-esteem, you know. She didn't have self-hate, but self-esteem was not something that fitted her. The popular definition of self-esteem was very far from her. And
but she had self-confidence.
no, she had confidence in God. Now, that's an interesting thing. When she made up her mind that something was to be done, get out of the way, because it was going to be done, come hell or high water. And she, it would be done. And that was it. But it was not self-confidence. I asked her when she won the Nobel Prize, what do you think of these things that have happened to you? What do you think of what has happened to you? And she said to me, we were walking in the street in the Bronx. It is inconceivable. It is inconceivable. And she did not have self-esteem. I don't know whether you know about the revelations in her letters to her spiritual directors,
Yes,
which
I've
have
read them.
the ones from the Indian article.
Yeah, and the letters that Father Brian had.
Yes. I didn't see the ones that Brian has. Brian's my old student. I taught him counseling. I didn't see those. But those letters are filled with darkness. And that darkness, if you've studied these things, is the dark night of the soul. That's exactly what it is. And it goes on for 40 years. As far as I can tell, I know of only one other saint who was in the dark night for 40 years. And that was St. Paul of the Cross. St. John of the Cross, who wrote about it, never said it went on for 40 years, you know. John of the Cross wrote beautiful, inspiring, elevating things. And see, when I read them, I said, now I understand something. Because about her, there was always a seriousness, always a somberness. Even when she laughed, which wasn't very often, it was something somber. When she smiled, she didn't laugh. And the night, the last day I saw her was the day before she went back to India to die. Father Andrew and I went down to see her. Father Andrew Apostoli, who is a priest of our community. And he's the other older man in our community. So Andrew and I went down and we said Mass for her.
Where was this?
Down at 145th Street. And no, it was at the Contemplative Sisters. It was 168 Union Avenue. And she was in a little tiny
Now,
aluminum.